So here is the trestle style desk that I made with a couple router bits and a table saw. No bandsaw was utilized in the making of the legs for this trestle table. How this came about is my wife saw this trestle style dining table on the internet and she said, I want this style of desk for the new office. However, when I looked at how to make the legs on a trestle table, all I found on the internet was legs made out of solid pine and cut with a giant bandsaw. I wanted solid maple, and I also didn't have a giant bandsaw, but I did have a Rockler flush trim bit and a Rockler pattern bit. And through a little ingenuity and a lot of gluing, I came up with the idea of taking fiberboard, gluing it together, and then covering it with either maple veneer or maple boards. And it actually came out to 284 boards glued together. Now, gluing 4 at a time, I then attached these patterns to it, then took the patterns to the router table, and here you can see the base actually made out of solid maple, the only part that was made out of solid maple. Ran it with a pattern bit, then flipped it over, used a flush trim bit, and then to make them wider I would then glue additional boards to the outside and then run it through the router table again. You'll see a little bit of what I'm getting at with these cove pieces and how I had to slowly make them bigger and bigger and run them through the router table. One of the issues I had is I had to remove a lot of meat and through the cove moldings, and so I ran them through the table saw, cutting kerfs in them that I could then chisel out. Here you see on the smaller pieces what that looks like. After chiseling out the kerfs, I then attached the pattern bit, would then bring it over to the router table and run it with the pattern bit and then the flush trim bit. Now again, I could only do 4 boards glued up at a time. So after doing the 4 boards through the router table, then I could attach the additional boards. Now the small coves required them to be 7 pieces wide. So there you see how that would look and how it looks on the larger ones, which needed 11 pieces. So I have 4 pieces that were ran through the router table and trimmed up. Then I glued 2 more to each end, and as you can see, and then ran it through the table and eventually got it to 11 pieces wide and running it through the router table looking flush and trim like that. However, one thing I realized when I was doing all this was that now I'm going to be moving on to the maple veneer, and I wasn't sure how well that would stick with contact cement to that rough routered cove. So I came up with the idea of taking a Luan plywood, which is very thin and again stable, soaked it in water, and then clamped it to the cove molding. I could only clamp it a little bit before it would start to crack. I would let it dry, then I would soak it again after it dried and clamp it some more. Eventually, clamping, soaking it, clamping it, I eventually got to the shape that I wanted. It took about 4 soakings and clampings, and then I could glue it to the cove fiberboard, and it would hold its shape, and then I could attach the maple veneer to that. You can see the larger ones, and those were no problem. They easily glued up nice. Smaller ones, I had to just sand out some minor imperfections, nothing big, but I just wanted to make sure that you wouldn't see those imperfections when I moved on to the contact cement and the maple veneer. And laminated those together, and then I trimmed them up, cut the 45s, and you can see the solid maple look that I was looking for. However, I needed something solid in the center of these legs that I could attach all these pieces to. So I decided to make a 4x4 out of solid or out of the fiberboard. I created that, stuck it down in a mortise that I created in the base. I wrapped the bottom there with some fiberboard and then wrapped that with the maple board. Also notice the mortise I've created in the side of the foot. That'll come into play later in the video. So now here we have the legs, and I have 3 levels attached to the leg at this point. I have 7 levels total. I'm now putting on the 4th level. And I created this out of plywood and then wrapped it with a piece of maple board. Again, plywood being very stable, I'm because again concerned with expansion and contraction. One of the things now you can see here too is I made sure all the pieces fit nice and tight, no gaps, no nothing, so that when you looked at it, it looked like one solid piece. By pre-staining the, the boards and then gluing them together, that would help if I did get any expansion. You wouldn't see that bare wood showing through. So that was the fifth and sixth level. Now I'm attaching the seventh, and you can see they came together quite nice. There was a little bit of a gap there at the 45, but what I found when I glued them together, since they're already pre-stained, and then taking a screwdriver and the shaft of that screwdriver and running it up along the edges and burnishing them, the little gaps that were there came together quite nice, and sanding them down, all of that, and it actually looked like a solid piece of wood. Any little imperfections, I used sawdust and some glue to fill them, and then sanded it all in, and then turned my shop into a paint station by dropping the plastic from the ceiling, and then I sprayed on 6 coats of polyurethane. You see the 4 leg bolts in the bottom of the base that I'm using to attach the legs to, and then also there was 2 additional leg bolt holes there, and that was going back to this piece that I was attaching between the 2 bases. And what I did there is that long board in between them, I took 2 solid boards, glued them together, and then mortise and tenon them into the feet. Now, a desk would not be a desk without a drawer, and so I was able to, on this desk, fit a very thin drawer, enough for some pens and some notepads and some other little miscellaneous stuff, but it did work out. And the desk ended up being, I made the top out obviously with some maple plywood, and it was 30 inches wide by 6 feet long. I wanted solid maple look for these legs, and I think I achieved that just with 2 router bits and the table saw, and I got the look that I was looking for. My wife was very pleased. Please let me know your thoughts, and you have a wonderful day.